I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Certainly not like that, not toward her. She was my friend's mom, the woman who'd been around since I was a teenager, the same woman who used to drive us to soccer practice in the sticky heat of summer and hand out bottles of Gatorade like she was keeping us alive. Back then I called her Miss Morgan, with the innocent respect you give adults who live in another orbit. But the years changed me, changed her, changed everything, and somewhere along the way that distance between us collapsed into something I couldn't name, something I wasn't prepared for. Now, when I thought of her, when I looked at her, when I let myself imagine her, I called her anything but Miss Morgan. It didn't happen in an instant, not like the cliched spark of lightning. It started slowly, like water wearing down stone, little by little, until I realized something inside me had shifted and there was no going back. A glance that lingered half a second too long. A smile that softened into something unspoken, something only the two of us seemed to recognize. I was staying over at Dylan's place for the week. We were supposed to be working on a summer project together, knocking out research and late-night editing sessions. But it was his mom's house that gave me more to think about than our assignment ever could. She had plenty of space, a beautiful guest room with sunlight in the mornings, and she cooked dinner most nights as if it was nothing. She moved through her home like she belonged to it fully, wandering barefoot across the hardwood floors, hair tied loosely like she hadn't bothered with mirrors, always with a glass of wine that she sipped from without ceremony. I noticed everything. I couldn't help but notice. And the noticing became dangerous. The way she laughed quietly to herself when she thought no one could hear. The subtle pause of her fingers on mine when she handed me a plate. The watchful gaze across the room when she thought I was too distracted to catch it. Every detail that should have been nothing grew into something in me, and I hated how much I liked it. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, undeniably, devastatingly so. She was different from the girls my age. She was calm, composed in a way they weren't. She didn't perform for anyone. She wasn't glued to her phone, fishing for likes, applying filters, rehearsing angles for a camera lens. She was just there, grounded, sharp, weary in ways that only made her more radiant. She wore her life openly, etched in soft lines around her eyes, in the way she carried herself like someone who had lived enough to know both joy and loss. And it was that quiet truth about her that drew me closer than I should have dared. It was a Thursday night when something finally shifted, something irreversible even if nothing physical happened yet. Dylan had gone to crash at his girlfriend's place, leaving me alone in the house with her. I was hunched over the dining table, laptop glowing, editing our presentation slides while the silence wrapped around me. Then she appeared, not with the cautious air of someone checking in, but with 2 glasses of wine in hand. She set one down in front of me, settled across the table, and smiled as though this had always been the plan. The house was still, except for the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of her ring tapping against her glass when she lifted it, the almost imperceptible rhythm of her breathing. We talked at first like it was casual, but the conversation edged into something more real. She asked about my plans after college, what I wanted from life, who I thought I might become. I tried to sound confident as if I had answers, but I didn't. She must have seen through the act because she leaned in, her voice steady but gentle, and said, "It's okay not to know." That landed deeper than I expected. It wasn't just permission, it was recognition, like she understood the restless uncertainty inside me better than I did. And in that moment, I looked up at her differently. I really looked. The tired half-smile she wore like armor, the years mapped softly across her face, the way her presence felt both fragile and unshakable at once. She looked like someone who had endured, who had walked through fire and come out whole, scarred maybe, but strong, intact, still carrying kindness. And I think that was the exact moment something inside me broke open. Nothing happened that night, not technically. Just long silences that carried too much weight, the brush of our knees under the table, The kind of eye contact that could undo you if you let it linger too long. But everything had changed anyway. The air between us was electric, humming with something neither of us said out loud. The next day I avoided her, shut myself in the guest room under the excuse of being busy, skipped dinner to spare us both. But avoidance never lasts, not when the current between two people is already too strong. The next morning I heard 3 soft knocks on the guest room door, followed by her voice, calm and steady, almost amused. "I've seen the way you look at me." My heart stopped. I didn't move. Couldn't. Every thought I'd shoved down came roaring back, loud, undeniable, all at once. Then I heard the faint click of the lock from the outside and the sound of the door opening. She stepped inside, closed it gently behind her, and for the first time I knew nothing would ever be the same. I sat frozen, still unable to speak. She stood just inside the doorway, calm but unreadable, her arms relaxed at her sides, her gaze fixed on mine as though she already knew what I'd say if I ever found words. "I'm not crazy," she said softly, moving closer. "I know what this is, what it could be, and what it probably shouldn't be." She sat down on the edge of the bed, not right next to me, but near enough that I could feel my breath falter. Her voice was steady, but beneath it was something raw, maybe fear, maybe exhaustion, maybe both. She looked at the carpet when she spoke again. "I was married for 18 years, left 3 years ago, not because of someone else, just because I realized I'd shrunk myself down to fit inside his life. I forgot what it felt like to be seen. I didn't trust myself to respond, didn't even trust myself to move, but then she looked up at me, eyes steady but glimmering with vulnerability. And then you come along," she continued, wide-eyed, careful, thoughtful in ways most men twice your age aren't. And I keep telling myself it's just attention, that I'm flattered, that it's harmless. She trailed off, but we both knew it wasn't harmless. It had stopped being harmless the moment those glances became too charged, the moment silence between us started saying more than words. And I wasn't innocent either. I'd been in relationships before, casual ones, the kind that fade out when routine sets in, but nothing had ever made me feel the way I did under her gaze, like I mattered in a way I hadn't before, like my presence alone meant something. But she wasn't just anyone. She was Claire, my best friend's mom. The line was clear, unshakable, the one rule you never break. And yet, in that quiet room, gravity itself seemed to be pulling us toward a place we weren't supposed to go. "You're twice my age," I whispered at last, "and you're Dylan's mom." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know." We sat in silence, the kind that grows louder the longer it lingers, until it filled the room and pressed against us. I wanted to spill everything I had been holding in, that I hadn't stopped thinking about her since that night at the table, that I dreamed of her voice, her laugh, even the way she said my name. But some fragile instinct told me to hold it back, to let the truth sit unspoken for just a little longer. When she stood to leave, my heart twisted. "I should go," she said. "I just needed to say it out loud." Her hand reached for the doorknob, hesitated, and then paused. Her gaze drifted to the dresser beside my bed, where a photo sat. Dylan's 22nd birthday, the one where she stood behind us, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. She picked it up, studied it quietly, and then whispered almost to herself, "You looked at me like that even then." I just didn't let myself believe it. She set the photo down gently, and before I could say or do anything, she turned back. Her fingers brushed mine, fleeting but searing, and in that second her touch carried more meaning than any confession could. And then, just as the world seemed to tilt towards something irreversible, the front door slammed. "Yo!" Dylan's voice rang through the hallway. "I forgot my charger." Claire flinched like she'd been struck. We pulled apart instinctively, her calm composure shattering into panic. "I thought he was staying out tonight," I whispered. He was, she said, already smoothing her hair, steadying her breath. Footsteps came closer. She looked at me, urgent, commanding, but fragile all at once. Pretend we were talking about school. Just don't look at me like that. She slipped out the door just before Dylan walked in, phone in hand, casual as ever. "You see my charger?" he asked. I forced a shrug, kept my voice even. "Check the kitchen. I think you left it by the outlet." He nodded and disappeared, and yet my heart was still racing. My skin still burned where her hand had touched mine. She had been in this room only moments before, and now Dylan was back as if nothing had changed, but everything had. 10 minutes passed after Dylan had left the house again, but I couldn't calm the pounding in my chest. The walls of that guest room seemed smaller than before, as if they carried the weight of what had almost happened and what had actually happened, which wasn't much by any technical measure, but was still everything. I sat frozen, staring at the door she had walked out of, replaying every detail, the way her fingers had grazed mine, the look in her eyes when she said she had noticed the way I looked at her even years earlier, the faint tremor in her voice when Dylan's voice came down the hall. I couldn't tell if the burn I felt in my chest was guilt or hunger or fear or some volatile mixture of the three. What I knew, though, was that whatever I had been pretending before, pretending it was just harmless attention, just curiosity, just admiration, was over. The truth had broken through. She had felt it, admitted it, and so had I. I heard her voice again later, drifting faintly from the kitchen after Dylan left for the second time. It had that bright, practiced quality I hadn't noticed before, the kind of voice that was light and easy, but only on the surface, as though she were layering it on top of something much heavier. I could tell she was burying everything that had just happened, tucking it behind the mask of small talk and maternal normalcy, pretending she was only Dylan's mom again. Nothing more, nothing complicated. But I couldn't bury it. My pulse still hadn't slowed, and every nerve in my body was alive with the memory of her standing in my room, admitting truths we shouldn't have said out loud. A minute passed, then another, and I thought maybe I'd imagined her return. But then her quiet footsteps moved down the hall again. Closer, steadier this time. She opened the door without knocking, slipped inside, and closed it behind her. Her face looked calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, like she was holding herself rigid to avoid unraveling. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice low because anything louder felt like it might shatter us both. She nodded, but her jaw was tight, and that single nod told me more than words. "This is exactly why we can't do this," she said softly. I swallowed. Nothing even happened. Her eyes met mine with a sharpness that cut through me. Didn't it? That question hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to argue, to tell her we hadn't crossed a line yet, that it was just touches, glances, silences. But the truth was, she was right. Something had already happened, something that didn't need physical proof to exist. We both stood in that room, caught between guilt and longing, both too tangled in our own thoughts to say more. Finally, she said, "It shouldn't have gotten this far. We both know that. You're my son's best friend. You're the age he used to be, and yet here we are." She exhaled, the sound of resignation in her voice, and added, "I think we need space." Her words cut deeper than I expected, not because they weren't reasonable, but because they felt like a door closing. "Is that what you want?" I asked. She hesitated, and in that hesitation I heard everything. "No," she admitted finally, "but it's what's smart." I nodded slowly, even though the ache behind my teeth made it hard to keep my mouth closed. "Right," I said. "Smart." She turned toward the door, ready to leave, but this time I couldn't let her go so easily. "Wait." The word came out before I thought it through, and she stopped. She turned back, eyes steady on mine, waiting. "When you said I looked at you like that," I asked, "what did you mean?" Her expression softened, like you were looking at someone you didn't want to forget. Something cracked open in me then, something bigger than the fear of being caught, bigger than the guilt of betraying Dylan. "You're not," I said, stepping closer without realizing I had moved. Her breath caught. Her hand brushed against mine again, that same electric pulse running through me. But before anything more could happen, a car door slammed outside. The sound broke us apart like a gunshot. She exhaled sharply and darted to the window. "I can't keep pretending this is nothing," she whispered. I felt the words tear out of me before I could stop them. "Then don't." She looked at me, her gaze holding mine for a long, hard second, then turned and walked out without another word. The heat of her presence lingered in the room long after she had gone, pressing into the air, into the walls, into me. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the hallway made me sit up. Every shadow under the door made me think she might return. She didn't. The next day was unbearable. She moved through the house like a ghost, polite, distant, deliberate, in every word and gesture, like she was trying to erase the night before. To anyone else, she might have looked the same. But I knew better. I saw the careful control, the way she avoided looking at me directly, the silence that spoke louder than anything she said, and I couldn't take it. That evening, Dylan invited a couple of friends over, turning the house into a noisy distraction. Laughter spilling out of the living room, beer bottles clinking, a dumb action movie blasting from the TV. I sat among them, forcing conversation, pretending to care about the plot, while she stayed mostly in the kitchen, claiming she was tired. But every time I glanced in her direction, I caught her eyes on me just for a second, and every time it happened, I felt my pulse spike. At one point, Dylan's friend Marissa plopped down next to me, her legs draped across my lap like we'd been flirting all night. I laughed awkwardly, trying not to make a scene, but then I saw her, Claire, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her face set in a mask of indifference, but her jaw clenched tight. For just a flash, I saw it. Jealousy. And it shook me. I couldn't stay there. I stood abruptly, muttered something about needing air, and slipped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool and sharp, cutting through the haze in my head. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady myself, trying to figure out how something so wrong could feel so necessary. 2 minutes later, the door creaked open behind me. I didn't even need to turn. I knew it was her. "I didn't think you'd come," I said. My voice was quiet, raw. "I shouldn't have," she replied, but her footsteps came closer. The distance between us shrank until the air was heavy again. "Still," she said, "I saw you." I turned to face her, watching. She didn't answer right away, and the silence said enough. "It didn't mean anything," I tried. She snapped back. "You think that makes it better? You're 22. You're supposed to flirt with girls your age. That's normal." I didn't back down. And what if I don't want normal? Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue but couldn't. "You keep pretending this thing between us isn't real," I pressed on. "You act like I'm imagining it, like it's some crush that'll fade. But you feel it too. Don't lie to me, Claire." Her face flushed, anger and longing tangled together. "Of course I feel it," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. "Do you think this has been easy for me? You walk into my life and suddenly I'm alive again, and I hate it. I hate that I look forward to your footsteps, that I remember what cologne you wear, that I can't sleep without seeing your face, and it terrifies me." I reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. "We're already changed," I whispered. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Her breath trembled, our faces inches apart. "I shouldn't," she whispered. "But you want to," I said. Her grip on my hand tightened, and then the porch light flicked on, the door creaked open, and Dylan's voice shattered everything. "Mom!" He stepped out, phone in hand, squinting into the dark. We froze, still touching, teetering on the edge of something neither of us could deny. Claire ripped her hand away from mine as if it burned her, clearing her throat quickly. I was just getting some air, she said lightly. Dylan turned to me. You good? My voice barely worked. Yeah, just needed space. He shrugged and went back inside. She didn't look at me again. I should go, she said, her voice sharp with finality, and this time I couldn't stop her. She disappeared into the house, and I didn't see her again for the rest of the night. But the fire in my chest, the ache in my hands where hers had been, didn't leave me. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. 2 texts from Dylan. The first, Bro, we need to talk. The second, did something happen between you and my mom? My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. I stepped into the hallway, half hoping it was some bad joke, but Dylan's door was open, his room empty. I turned to Claire's door and knocked softly. She opened it just a crack, her eyes rimmed red like she hadn't slept. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even look afraid. She just looked broken. He knows, I whispered. She nodded. I know. How? I asked. She looked away. He heard us, last night, through the window. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. What exactly did he hear? She swallowed hard. Enough. We stood in silence, wrecked in different ways. Finally, she said, I told him nothing happened. That I was going through something and you were just being kind. And he believed that? I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, No. I sank onto the rug, head in my hands, feeling the whole fragile structure collapse. Jesus, I shouldn't have let it get this far, she said, voice cracking. I should have stopped the moment I felt something. I've already ruined too much. I looked up at her. You didn't ruin anything. Her voice snapped sharp. I might have just lost my son. Her eyes glistened. He looked at me like I was a stranger this morning, like I disgusted him. My throat tightened. And what about me? Do I disgust you, Claire? She stepped back, hurt flashing across her face. Don't do that. I need to know, I said. She gripped the edge of the door, knuckles white. You're the first person who's made me feel anything real in years. I stood, my voice low, urgent. Then don't lie to me now. Before she could answer, a voice rang out down the hall. Unbelievable! We both turned. Dylan stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes blazing. I knew something was off, he said, but I didn't think you'd actually... Jesus, Mom. Dylan, she started. Don't, he snapped, stepping back. Just don't. He turned and walked out the front door, slamming it so hard the whole house shook. Claire crumpled against the wall, her face in her hands, breathing hard, tears brimming. We just lost him, she whispered. And for the first time, I didn't know if we could get him back. The house felt unbearably silent after Dylan stormed out, a silence that didn't just belong to empty rooms, but to the spaces between us, filled with everything that had been spoken and everything that hadn't. Claire stayed pressed against the wall, her breathing uneven, eyes shining with a pain that seemed older than this moment, as if years of regret had been waiting for the smallest spark to catch fire. I stood frozen, unsure whether to comfort her or give her space, unsure if my presence was now a reminder of the loss she feared most. Finally, I moved toward her, not with words, but with the quiet intention of being close enough that she didn't have to collapse alone. She didn't resist, though she didn't look at me either, and when I reached out to steady her shoulder, she trembled like someone who had been holding too much for too long. Hours passed without real conversation. Dylan didn't return, and the absence stretched through the evening, heavy with what it meant. Claire eventually sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, and I sat across from her, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the small noises of a house suddenly too big. At last she spoke, her voice low, almost defeated. This can't go on. We've already crossed lines that can't be uncrossed, and my son, my own son, looks at me like I'm someone else entirely. Maybe I am. She lifted her gaze to mine then, tired but steady. What we had It was real. Don't ever think it wasn't. But real doesn't always mean possible. I wanted to fight her words, to argue that love, however twisted in circumstance, was worth whatever storm followed. But I saw in her eyes a truth I couldn't deny. She wasn't just choosing for herself. She was choosing for her son, for the fractured family that still had a chance of mending if she stepped away now. So I only nodded, even as my chest ached with everything I wasn't saying. We sat there in silence until the sky began to pale with morning. By the time Dylan came home, Claire had already retreated to her room, the door closed, the line drawn. I understood then that some stories burn brightest in the shadows, destined not for endings, but for memory. Unfinished, unforgotten, and quietly devastating.